Mike Lombardi of The Ringer joining us here on the show. What do you make of all this, Mike?
Well, hello, Rich.
Hello.
How are you?
How are you?
Strange time in the NFL. You know, it's interesting. Chris Ballard left the Chiefs, and then 3 months later, we see their general manager get fired, and then Brandon Breen leaves the Carolina Panthers, and we see Dave Gettleman get fired today. And I think what you're seeing here is a reflection of somebody told the players no on their contract. I think Steve Smith was released because of their salary cap, and Gettleman basically ran the team with the idea that he could develop some players while he let D'Angelo Williams go, and felt like Josh Norman, they could replace him on their team for less money than it was going to cost them. And so when you do that, you're going to alienate some players. And I think the concern you have as a general manager is you just got to try to be honest and upfront with people. I think you can't tell them, look, I'm going to pay you, and then not pay them, and that causes some problems. I think you have to be fairly forthright and talk to them. And, you know, Belichick told me this back in 1992 when he came into Cleveland. He said, look, if you want the players to like you, you're in the wrong job. And I think what you're seeing here is the reaction from the players about Gettleman. He did what he was supposed to do with the cap. Not saying he was right, saying he did what he thought he had to do.
Well, so why did the Panthers, and as you mentioned, the Chiefs as well, you've got two guys in John Dorsey and Dave Gettleman now let go in the summer months? What is happening?
Different situations. I think where you looked at John's situation in Kansas City, I think Clark Hunt felt like there was a lack of communication from the personnel department through the organization. You know, John is a really good player evaluator. John Dorsey does a really good job of evaluating talent. But when you're the general manager, and I think teams do this quite often, is they hire college scouting directors and they make them general managers, and then they want them to stay in the office and handle some of the stuff. These guys want to be on the road, and John liked being on the road, like Ted Thompson. Ted Thompson likes being on the road. He's a scout by heart. And, you know, that was great when I started in the league in '84 because you had to be on the road because you had to have 16-millimeter tape to watch the players. But today, because of the video, because of the digital video, that you can sit at your desk and watch all the tape. And I think there was a lack of communication between the front office and the Chiefs, and I think they felt like they needed a better communicator and aligning their organization. That's why they made the move with John Dorsey. That doesn't mean John's not a good scout. That doesn't mean John's not a great evaluator. That means John's administrative skills were not what they wanted in Kansas City. As for Gettleman, I think he paid the price for being the guy who said no. He said no to a lot of players. He alienated a lot of players. And I think if you look over the history of the Jerry Richardson administration in Carolina, he has a relationship with the players. He's been a former player before. And I think that wears down on you. And if the owner's not completely behind you in the decisions, this is what happens.
Mike Lombardi of The Ringer joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. What is happening between Washington and Kirk Cousins, Michael?
Well, this is the best. To me, this is the highlight of the summer. This might be as good as Baby Driver as a movie, just to watch this. I think what's happened is the Redskins misevaluated this from the beginning, okay? They felt like, and Bruce Allen, their general manager, whatever you want to call Bruce Allen, he runs their team. He controls the money. And I think what you saw with Dave Gettleman is the person that controls the money is ultimately in charge of the team. You can be titled general manager like Scott McCloughan was, but if you don't control the money, you don't run the team. It's the old Watergate thing, Rich, follow the money, and you know who's in charge. Bruce controls the money. Bruce miscalculated the ability of Kirk Cousins. I think they still miscalculate the ability of Kirk Cousins. There was a time period when Kyle Shanahan joined me in a brief little bit that I was still in Cleveland, and he wanted to trade desperately for Kirk Cousins, and Bruce was really being indifferent about maybe making a trade, and he wanted the second-round pick at that time. And, it was hard to trade a second-round pick for a guy you hadn't seen play in pro football. But Bruce miscalculated this from the beginning. He thought he could convince Priority Sports and Mike McCarthy and Mark Bartlestein, the NBA agent, and Rick Smith that he could kind of convince him in taking a deal, because part of who Bruce is as a general manager is he was a former agent. So he thinks he can sell or talk a cat off the top of a fish truck. So I think what happened there is he miscalculated. And then his only out was, since he continued to miscalculate it, was to keep franchising him. And so now he's in a situation where the player has played far better than he thought, but clearly not to the level that he's being paid. And he's put the agent in a position where it's easy for them to say, you know what, why should we do a deal? Let's just walk it through, Rich. Let's say he doesn't sign a long-term extension of the number he wants. He goes out, he buys a life insurance policy to protect him for future years. Won't cost him that much money. Maybe it cost him $500,000. He's got plenty of money in the pocket. He protects himself for future investments. That's all tax-free money, too, if it happens to come through. And then he sits there and he puts the pressure back on Washington and says, you know what? Either you franchise me again, or I'm just going to take a stroll out to the West Coast to my good friend Kyle Shanahan, who loves me, and they'll pay me a market deal for the next 5 years. So this is a situation that Bruce never saw through or looked past, and it's what I call the false duality. It's when you only think of A or B. Where Belichick does so well is he makes every decision based on A, B, and then he's able to figure out what C, D, E, and F are. What Bruce did here is saw A or B, and now he's faced with a false duality. There's no longer A or B. There's a lot of C, D, E, and F and G.
Mike Lombardi of The Ringer here on the Rich Eisen Show. So you don't think Cousins is going to sign, that they're not going to come to a long-term agreement by
unless they're going to pay the freight that he wants, why should he? Right. He has all the leverage. Rich, he has had all the leverage since they put the franchise tag on him, and he went out and played well. Leverage is what matters in sports. I mean, look, let's face it. If you have the leverage, you can get more deals done with players in September on extensions than you can in March. Why? Because in September, players are worried about injury. They fear something. They don't have the leverage. But when you get to March, they're no longer fearful of an injury. They're out there. They want the best deal. And so you have to calculate when you want to do it. Bruce thinks he has the leverage because he sends these funny proposals entitled the Billy Kilmer proposal or the Sonny Jurgensen proposal to Rick Smith, and in reality, they're not going to listen to him. They've been around the block too much. He can't convince them to come off top of the fish truck.
So what's happening between LeVeon Bell and the Steelers, best you can tell, Michael?
I would just suspect to say it's really about what the number is. I mean, the one thing about doing these contracts, Rich, when you're in this level of a franchise player, they're easier contracts to do in terms of average per year. They're harder contracts to do based on spread of the money, based on the guaranteed dollars of the money. And, that's usually where lies the problem. And you can agree to a number because there's enough of a market sample to say, hey, look, here I am. Again, the problem with Kirk Cousins is the market sample far exceeds Cousins' ability. He's going to be paid above and beyond a number that the Redskins had no idea that they could ever want to pay. Well, they had no idea they want to pay it, so they're negotiating against themselves. I think in Le'Veon Bell's case, they know he's one of the top 1 or 2 backs in the league. They're working off that number. If he happens to, they say he's the best back in the league, then it's about how much more he can make above and beyond. And then we get into the difficult area, how we're going to guarantee the money, how it's going to be spread over the contract, how much is the first 3 years of the deal. What fans don't always understand is all these deals are valuated on 3 years. They're not valuated on when it comes out. Hey, here's the 5-year total. They're evaluated on what's in the 3 years and how much of the guarantee is in the first 3 years. Do you get 80% guaranteed? Did you get 75? Did you get 65? Those are the key numbers.
So what do you think ends up happening with Le'Veon and the Steelers?
I would suspect they do a deal. I mean, Pittsburgh is always good about re-signing their players, and they get to a point like they did with Mike Wallace where if they're not going to do a deal, then they're able to walk away. Yeah. The one thing you know when you're dealing with Pittsburgh is Pittsburgh will leave the table. Pittsburgh's owner, their culture is what matters more than anything.
Well,
so when your culture matters, you're willing to leave the table and find another back. I think that Le'Veon knows this. I think they'll do a deal for a really above-market deal.
I hope so. I mean, because, look, Kirk Cousins is a quarterback of note, and he has flashes of excellence, and we can go back and forth about his value. Le'Veon Bell, there's no argument. There's no argument where he stands. Certainly, in the last several years. I know he hasn't played all 16 games because of things that have gone down off the field, and I'm sure the Steelers are reminding his representatives of that over right now. But there's no question as to how great he is.
That's pretty easy to do. I mean, first of all, the signing bonus language already protects you on that. So if you miss any games due to suspension off of a signing bonus, you're going to get a refund on the signing bonus. It's what happened with Josh Gordon. That's why he was upside down with his Browns contract. He had been suspended so much that he ended up owing the Browns money for missing games. And so there's already language in there. Again, this is about spread of money. It's about guarantee. I think average per year is the least problem they're going to have in Pittsburgh. Mike
Lombardi of The Ringer joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. So what the hell's happening with Ezekiel Elliott, best you can tell me right now?
Rich, Zeke has been an interesting off-season character. I think what you found is there's been some talk. He's been in Vegas quite a bit. Gronk has gotten exposure for partying a little bit, but Gronk is he's the Dean Martin of partying. Dean Martin used to pretend he drank all the time and never drank. It was apple juice in there, and I think Gronk's a little bit like Dean Martin. Doesn't really do a lot, but it looks like he's having fun. And I think what you see with Zeke is he is having fun, and he's out there. And I think the season has gotten away from him, and I think that they're having a harder time controlling his actions off the field. And I think this is going to be the one area where you'll see that it could become problematic for the Cowboys. I think Adam Schefter reported on Friday that they're preparing for some sort of suspension, which is what I'm hearing. I wrote a column for The Ringer and talked about why I think the Cowboys are really in jeopardy in the first 5 games of the season because they're going to lose David Irvin, one of their better players. They're going to lose. They've lost him for 4 games. They could potentially lose Zeke Elliott because of these off-the-field mismanaged behavior, and they're having a hard time talking to the agent to get control of the situation. Normally, when you're dealing with this situation, is you're using the agent, you're using the family, you're using everybody to help you corral the young man. And in Elliott's case, I don't think he's listening to anybody, and I think this is going from bad to worse fairly quickly.
So if you said the Cousins-Redskins situation is the baby driver of the NFL summer, what is the soundtrack for that song, Michael? You got like something from the Springsteen oeuvre? I know that's your.
I think it's all about miscalculation. So I think it's you don't know me. I think that's the title of the song. Okay. You don't know me, and I don't think they don't know Kirk Cousins, and they refuse to want to pay him. You know, Rich, it happens all the time. You know, you sign a player as a free agent coming out of college. You don't want to believe he's a great player because how could he get through the draft? Instead of just evaluating what your eyes tell you. And so you end up having these conditions built up in your mind that aren't accurate, and you should just evaluate the player. Because you know what? Sometimes we miss. Cousins is a good player. He'll be a good player if he goes somewhere else. That's what he does.
Lombo, can't wait to get you back from the Jersey Shore from your own private beach. Can't wait to have you back here.
No, I'm not Chris Christie. I'm amongst the people here. I'm not lame duck here, Chris.
Okay, all right.
Rich.
All right, Lombo.
Thanks a lot.
You got it. It's at M Lombardi NFL.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on radio stations across the country and audience.
If you like that video, be sure to download our app, and I'll be sure to help the NFL figure out what a catch is.